Well, welcome everyone to today's episode. Today, we're diving into one of the most important conversations in the workplace: mental health, resilience, and creating a culture of care. Whether you're in hospitality, corporate leadership, or any industry that thrives on teamwork and high performance, the well-being of your people is the foundation of success. My guest today is someone who I've known for a long time and who has dedicated his career to helping leaders and teams become more caring and resilient. Graeme Cowan is the founding board director of Are You OK and host of the Caring CEO podcast. He has held senior leadership positions at Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Kearney, but his journey took a deep personal turn when he faced a severe 5-year battle with depression. Emerging from that experience, Graeme developed powerful insights into resilience, mental well-being, and performance, insights that have shaped his work with organizations around the world. He is the author of 4 books, including the acclaimed Back from the Brink, which was endorsed by former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. As the co-founder of WeCare 365, Graeme has also developed an e-learning solutions that equip managers with the tools to have better mental health conversations in the workplace. Today, we're talking about change fatigue, stress, risk-averse teams, and how leaders can foster workplaces where people thrive, even in high-pressure environments. So, whether you're a business owner, manager, or frontline team member, this episode will give you practical strategies to create a healthier and more resilient workplace. So, let's dive in. Graeme, welcome and thank you for joining me in today's episode. How are you?
Lovely. I'm very well, thank you, and lovely to join you, Michelle. Lovely to catch up.
Yeah, it is. It is. Now, look, we've got a number of questions that we're going to cover, Graeme, but I think really, there's a lot out there about the mental health space, and I've had some amazing guests on over the last 6 years speaking about it and their personal journeys. So I'd love to just start with that and not get into too dark a space, Graham, but I think people need to understand when you're coming from, your own personal journey, creating the Are You Okay, which we all know, and that would be great. And then we can get into the questions. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Perfect.
I guess, the moment that came for me, which was a real turning point, I was working with the management consulting company, Carney, and I
Mhm.
was heading up or co-leading a recruitment division. And we were doing a lot of work in the sort of e-commerce area. It was an emerging area. This is back in
Mm.
2000. And, the phones were running hot and everything was great. And then I think it was in March 10, which ironically was my birthday,
Right.
the tech crash happened. And
Mm.
so in a very, very short period of time, many of the promising technology companies on NASDAQ just collapsed.
Mm.
And basically our business collapsed. And I, as one of the co-leaders there, was trying to put on a brave front and,
Mm.
to be honest, really have a bit of a mask on. But I was actually became really, really anxious, and that affected my sleep.
Mm.
And the poor sleep, affected how you are during the day. And yet trying to put on a mask, is also very, very fatiguing as well.
Mm.
And it was, a really serious market setback. And a very short period of time, I lost my job, my marriage broke down, and I had to go and live with my parents up in
Mm.
Foster on the north coast of New South Wales. And it was just a really, really, now look back now, it was just, I just felt hopeless, absolutely hopeless. I was 110% convinced that I would never, bounce back. And I remember
Mm.
one time I was in the kitchen with my mother and feeling really sorry, saying, "Why me? Why me?"
Mm.
And she hit me with one of those mother stares, right to the back of your back of your head. And she said, "I believe you'll use this experience to help other people."
Mm.
And when she said that, I didn't think that was at all possible, but it did sow a seed. And
Mm.
so over a period of time, I began to walk regularly, reconnect with family and friends, adopt meditation as a habit, and of course have good medical care. And I
Mm,
did gradually come back. It wasn't a straight line, but I really came back. And one of the big breakthroughs was deciding to write my first book, Back from the Brink.
right.
And I wrote that because I really yearned, when I was going through a tough time, I really yearned for stories of people like me who'd been through something really tough, strong adversity, but had
Mm,
come out. And so working on that project really made me think about, other people. When you're depressed, you're very me focused. And this project
mm,
made me think about how can I help and benefit other people? And that I think was an important step in the recovery. And I did finally release it. I ended up interviewing a number of well-known Australians at the time and some everyday people and shared their stories. A couple of Olympic gold medal swimmers and
mm,
former Premier of West Australia, that icon of the art world, Margaret Olley, who's since passed
right.
away, and Australia's, most famous poet, Les Murray, who has also
Mm,
passed away. And when it was launched by the former opposition leader in New South Wales, John Brogden,
hmm.
who'd had his own mental health struggles. And we launched it at the Black Dog Institute. And it created a lot of interest because it was really the first time that, there were some higher profile people talking about tough times and,
Mm,
really struggling. And it got, it's a lot of publicity. We even had the SBS news crew there, and it was featured
right.
on the 6:30 news on SBS. And that in turn led to lots of other publicity. And so over a period of time, I did a lot of interviews on TV and radio and newspapers. And it really created, I guess, a bit of a groundswell.
Yes.
And it was the evolution out from there was people started to ask me to speak in other workplaces, often in the country where there wasn't good mental
Mm,
health services and support. And through my book, I met Gavin Larkin, the founder of Are You OK?
mm,
And when he told me about this concept, a conversation could change a life, it just really resonated. And I just
yeah.
believed in that so much because, the support of my parents was just paramount in my
Mm,
recovery. And I don't think I would have made it without them.
yes.
So with no money, no employees, we launched the very first Are You OK? In September 2009 and managed to get it off to a pretty good start. But
Mm,
it's tremendously rewarding to see how that has grown in reach and impact and to see that it has played a role in helping to reduce stigma.
mm,
Hasn't eliminated it at all, but it really has played a very, very strong role in reducing it in the community and also in the
mm.
workplace.
Yeah. It's certain, and it just started that conversation, didn't it? Are you okay? Just standing still, asking somebody and opening your ears and actually listening. It was
Yeah.
more than just a passing statement. And my goodness, I'm sure we'll talk more about that association over the course of this episode, but it really was that catalyst for people to say, you know what? It is okay to
Mm.
check in, show that I can be a caring person,
Yeah.
even though I may be the boss or the owner, I can care about my team. I can show some form of emotion, but also for each other on the front line or in those leadership roles where they could look at their peers and see them across the table, perhaps, even like yourself, when everything was just imploding and it wasn't just you, it was everybody around them that it was just that start of the conversation. So thank you for setting the scene, Graeme. And isn't it wonderful that when you think about there, whereas you're in the kitchen with your mum, and it's just a simple line, but it was a line that was from her heart that
Mm.
really connected with you at that time, realizing that yes, you could sit there in this wallow of pity, but would
Mm.
you, well, where would you be today? But she knew there was, eventually a mother's, you just got to be tough and say, this
Yeah.
is how it is, and get you moving on. So I'm so pleased she did that, and I'm sure the community that have been impacted by your books, but also through Are You OK, have also very grateful. So let's look at a couple of these questions. Your journey, as you've shared with that, and you've worked, um, has worked with really some big names in business and helped leaders create more caring and resilient teams. In industries like hospitality, which is my
Mm.
passion, where
Mm.
high pressure and fast-paced environments are the norm, what are some practical ways, Graham, that leaders can foster a culture of care and that mental well-being? Because for those in the hospitality industry, it is 365 and a quarter days. It's 7 nights, 7 days. They don't see the regular people perhaps every day. And there's these changing shifts, whether they're a leader where they might do 5 nights, 5 days, or split shifts, or the working at university or a second job. It's really can play, as you were mentioning before, on your sleep patterns, but
Mm.
also those connections, those deeper connections than just saying hi in the hallway. So, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it sounds pretty straightforward, but it really is sort of focusing on what you can control.
Mm,
And there's a hell of a lot outside of our control. There's a Professor Sonia Lieber-Mirsky who wrote a book called The How of Happiness, and she looked at 400 peer-reviewed studies to try and understand what was it that led to people's mood, or what
mm,
psychologists call positive affect. And she found there was three components. There was our genetics, there were the events that happened in our lives, and there was our intentional actions, what we chose to do each day.
mm,
And probably a bit surprising to some people is that the biggest contributor is our genetics. They
mm,
contribute 50% to our mood and resilience. Some people are just born more resilient than others, more robust than the others. But the really optimistic view is that our intentional actions contribute 40%, 40%, and just the events, just 10%. Now, she
right.
did say that was, more like everyday events. And I would argue that things like COVID
Mm,
was, a massive game changer for so many people, especially in the hospitality industry. But it is now, and it is really choosing to focus on the things you can control.
mm,
One of the positive things in hospitality is that, you're on your feet a lot. You're
mm,
walking around the place, you're serving. And to be honest, that's a healthy thing. You're getting movement and you're getting steps. And if we get 7,500 steps a day, that's been shown to have a really positive view on our physical health and our mental health.
mm,
The thing that hospitality doesn't allow or doesn't make happen too much is getting outside and getting,
mm,
sunshine, nature, and that sort of thing. So, but there are ways around that, and individual employees and managers can choose how they do that. So, for example, if you're traveling to work, you can get out before, half an hour before the actual place and walk for 30 minutes to
mm,
your place. And you're outside. It's been proven that if you're in a green space or walking in nature, that's even better for our well-being.
mm,
So thinking about, the shifts that happen and working as a team to work out when someone can have predictable time off. Now, I'd interviewed some people at Boston Consulting Group, and you might say, well, what do they have to do with hospitality? But they also work on these ridiculous assignments where they get
mm.
a job and they literally have to work 18 hours a day to make a difference.
Gosh.
And what they did was to identify when they could have predictable time off. So every person was allowed to work out amongst each other when they could have predictable time off or out away from the work.
Mm,
And for some people, that could be, Monday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And in that period, they would have that predictable time off and do something that was really important to them. For some, it was going to a gym or walking outside or meeting friends,
mm,
writing a book, whatever. And they found that had an absolutely profound impact. Just having that predictable time off during the time, and it
mm,
was even more beneficial to the partners in the firm than some of the more junior staff. So working out when you can have time out to get some sunshine, get some fresh
Mm,
air. The other element, of course, is having breaks. And there are times in hospitality when you can have breaks, when it is very, very quiet.
mm,
And just being able to do some deep breathing, the old in for 4 through the nose, hold for 7, out for 8 through your mouth.
mm.
If you do that for 1 minute, and I often do this in workshops, it's just a brain reset and it takes 1 minute.
Yes.
Everyone, including everyone in hospitality, can find minutes during the day that really reset our brain.
Mm,
And of course, drinking lots of water, they're the
yes.
things that, lots of water, low fat protein, getting outside, some breathing exercises to reset our mental well-being. They
Mm.
all add up to a good combination.
Yeah, you're right. And it is a combination. I think there's 2 points there that I'd like to highlight. It's not just saying, I'm going to take the time off, it's having that predictable time off. I think that
Mm.
is really key. It's like setting that boundary and then communicating it to people saying, I'm not going to be, talking, taking telephone calls or whatever. I'm doing this for the hour. And it's something about them and not feeling guilty about it. The other is about walking outside. Now, you're right. The hospitality, world is all about indoors and delighting, the guests that are inside. But I've been saying that to leaders when they've been doing my program, Graeme, is that, instead of having that conversation over the desk to somebody else in the leadership team, get up and go for a walk. And I know a number of the venues do this and the people
Yeah,
that are in them. And it just really struck me because I said, you're getting those steps up, you're getting some fresh air, but it's also, we've been finding a great way to have perhaps those conversations that are, you just don't want to look somebody in the eye about.
exactly.
Maybe it's something that's really heartfelt to you. I'm not saying, oh, well, we're firing them. It's more of those really heartfelt conversations where they want to stand beside each other and the person doesn't have to see the perhaps even the fear in their eyes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm,
And, if you think of those that have got children, when
mm.
you are driving in the car, everyone's looking forward. The most profound things come out,
Yes.
because we're not looking at each other eye to eye. And
Mm.
some real insights come out with kids when they
Yes.
share what they're thinking about, what they're fearful about. And
Mm.
it does build connections. There's time when it's good to be face to face, but
Yes.
there's
Yes.
other times when it's better to have an emotional connection, speak with authenticity, and explain what's really going on.
Yes, yeah. I think it also allows people to pause that little bit longer too, Graham.
Mm,
When you're sitting opposite each other, like we are now, even though it's on
mm.
Zoom, you're sort of waiting for that person to close their mouth, and that's your cue to open your mouth and then to open your ears. Whereas when you're beside each other, you're not actually seeing that part of that physical part of that person. So when they do pause, you're waiting still to listen, aren't you? Waiting for some other cue, not just the facial expression of opening and closing the mouth. So thank you for making those points. I think there's some that no matter what industry they're in, that people can take away and think, well, what can I implement in my day-to-day routine and then share? I think that's probably the next thing too, isn't it, Graham? Is that leaders may be doing this, but they need to let the teams know that, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. We do not expect you to be working 24 hours around the clock. You can't do it, can you?
Absolutely. And in the example of BCG, they come to call it PTO, predictable time off.
Mm,
And what was magic about it is that, because they're always changing teams depending on what assignment they're working on. Same in hospitality,
mm,
changing teams, different hours, different shifts. But they all, when they start it, they all work it out together. And
mm,
so, I'm having Monday from, 8 to 9 off. You're having Tuesday afternoon off. And they make also a pact that they'll cover for each other
mm.
when someone has that predictable time off. And so that's a really great element as well.
Yes.
Funny enough, when they were doing it with their clients, their clients were really fascinated by it and thought, what a great idea. We must do
Mm,
that here, to work
yes.
out when we have predictable time off.
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself. I'm just, and it is that respect for each other, I think is really, really important, and not just putting it on a meeting on a Wednesday afternoon when you've already been forewarned that Graham can't be there between those particular hours. So it's that true deep respect. So yes, I can see how what they did in their office has just duplicated and caused quite a ripple effect. Many businesses, especially in hospitality, have experienced constant change, staff shortages, economic challenges, and evolving customer expectations. And really, the way we are at the moment, not just here in Australia, but I have a lot of global listeners. This is a big impact, both
Mm.
our economies, about our work relationships where is our job going to be here tomorrow? Am I stable? So there's a lot of challenges, both outwardly and inwardly, that are happening. You talk about change fatigue. And
Mm.
wow, this is a big one because before we click record, we were talking about those days a few years ago and the changes that continue to happen. It's
Yeah.
not only just changes that have stopped and started us. It's also the changes with AI in particular too, isn't it, Graham? Like it's
Yeah.
just moving so fast. I know some days I get to the end of the day and think, I don't think I've done anything that I predicted because I've been doing this and doing that. And the expectations of people going, well, I want this now, but they're not using that terminology, but you're thinking in the back of your mind, well, I've got to do it. So, what are the warning signs that a team is suffering from it? And what strategies can help them regain that energy and focus?
Well, change fatigue is really, a sign of burnout, personal and team burnout. That's what it
Mm,
signals. And not surprisingly, that often comes with people feeling tired, fatigued,
mm,
and also that, there's things that they can't change. There's things outside our control. And one of the things about change fatigue and decline in our mood is that we tend to have black and white thinking.
mm.
Yes, no, this will work, that won't work. And rarely is life that exact. And one of the benefits of keeping ourselves in the green zone in a positive mood is that we are more creative. There's some Harvard researchers that show that when we're in a positive mood, we're 31% more productive, 37% more influential, and 300% more creative.
Wow.
So there's very, very important reasons for us to strive to be in that place. And so when we do notice that things are getting slow, people are starting to burn out, there's are things you can do. And I worked with a group in AB Bank, and they were like an internal consulting group,
Mm,
and they worked across operations, did lots of very varied work, and often in some really tough situations. And they had a very, very good leader, a guy called David Banks, who was general manager there. And so he organized for me to come in and talk about, mood and fatigue and things that influence us. And then he got everyone together with their managers. It was a group of about 80 people. And so there's
mm.
about 8 groups there together. And we were just asking, what's the biggest stress or what's something that could address it? And then they sort of summarized that. They went back with just the leaders the next week and looked at all the things that could make a difference. And what they decided to do was just three things. One was to all have breakfast together one day of the week.
Right.
So
Mm,
before work, to actually just socialize and get together and find out what's really going on in people's lives.
mm,
The second thing they did was decide to embrace the flexible work policy that they had in the bank. And I get that in hospitality, that's not always the case. You often have to be on the premises. But the third thing they did also was to decide every Friday that they would finish at 3 p.m. and to do something for their self-care.
Right.
So they chose to do those, three things for 6 weeks, and they measure engagement after that period of time, and
Mm.
stress level had come down hugely. Oh, the one more thing that David did was he held two weekly webinars about Q&A, about the changes going on, and he would
Mm.
answer questions. Sometimes he knew the answer, sometimes he didn't. But
Yes.
just doing these things, which people suggested, brought down that stress, brought down that
Mm.
fatigue, and they were far more energized, in a very relatively short time later, 6 weeks later.
Wow, gosh. And you're right. I love that idea about Q&A because a lot of the times stress can be caused by people not knowing or feeling that they've been left out or misunderstanding what's being said or not getting a full story or those lovely whispers and gossip. There's nothing like that, in every business, it doesn't matter how big or how small. It can just stress people out and people leave jobs because they think they're going to lose, and it's just a minefield of things. So I love that idea about Q&A, just and probably sometimes he'd be bombarded, I'd say, with questions, and other days he may have been sitting there just thinking, well, I'll think of one and I'll do it. Because people just needed that time to have that conversation. I think it's a great one. All
And
of them
and
are. Mm,
and what David said, which I also think was amazing, or really, really on the button, he said, "Well, there's three types of things. There's things that I don't know,
yeah.
and I'll tell you, I don't know." He says, "There's things I do know, but I can't tell you yet.
Yes.
And then there's things I do know, and I can tell you."
Mm,
And just by setting that expectation
yes.
and sticking to it, again, just really brought down the
Mm,
stress levels. And they
yes.
understood that there were some things that he did know, but he couldn't tell, and they accepted that.
Mm.
And just to have the dialogue just brought down that stress level.
Yeah, and it's just simple dialogue. It's coming back to that communication again,
Of
isn't it?
course.
But
Yeah.
setting that scene as he did. Hospitality thrives on delivering exceptional service under pressure, but stress can easily tip that into burnout. How can businesses strike the right balance between maintaining high performance standards, which all businesses, are expected and their employees and employers, expect of each other, and ensuring employees' mental health doesn't suffer? Mm.
I'll share a sporting analogy
Mm-hmm.
and it's a true story. It's the story of Richmond Football Club in Melbourne.
Mm.
And in 2016, they had a shocking year. They came, I think, 13th in the competition.
Gosh.
And their coach, Damien Hardwick, was just under the pump, micromanaging. Everyone was stressed, everyone was miserable, and the results reflected that. He took a break, and his father said, "Look, that season doesn't define you. Why don't you go over to the US and visit a few sports teams, see what's happening around there,
Mm.
and see if you can get some ideas?" Anyway, he came across this process which was called the three H's: hardships, highlights, and heroes.
Mm.
And so what that meant was that each person was to share the hardship they'd had in their lives, something that had been really tough, the highlights, things that have been great, and the heroes, the people who'd really inspired them. And so he decided to embrace this. And at the start of the season, all 45, all the players and all the coaching staff got together, and he led off and talked about, the hardships. And the hardships was, of course, last year, horrible
Mm.
season. My wife told me I wasn't the man that she married. I was micromanaging you, and I know you were really pissing, I was pissing you off.
Mm.
Um, but then he then talked about the highlights, and he'd had won premierships in the past, had children, birth of children, highlights, and had some really good things to share there. And then when he spoke about heroes, he talked about his father, who
Mm.
pulled him aside after that terrible season and encouraged him to refresh, reset,
Mm.
go away and reflect. And it then went through every one of the 45 players and coaching staff. And some had to share some really close things to them, deeply close and personal. For example, some of the players had grown up in housing commission
Mm,
places, and they were embarrassed to invite their friends round because they'd see how they were living. So
mm,
they're really brutally honest, and that sort of trust and interpersonal respect built up over a period of time.
mm.
About halfway during the season, there was a young player. I think he was his 21st birthday, but he lived at Bendigo. And so he invited everyone, but he thought, maybe five of my best mates will come. Every single person went on a
Oh,
bus.
wow.
And it was just this amazing show of interpersonal trust and respect.
Mm,
And that trust and respect in any organization, whether it's, in a restaurant, a cafe, that trust and respect means that we can work better together. And the bottom line is that after coming 16th one year, they won the comp the next year.
gosh.
And they put it down to that building that trust, respect, and knowledge about each other. And that can apply in any workplace.
Yeah. And thank you so much for that, that story, Graeme, because it just shows you. I mean, they still needed the skills, how to kick and pass that ball and jump those phenomenal heights that they do in AFL. But it was more the sense of them connecting as a person to each other, wasn't it? And building
Definitely.
that team. So, and how wonderful you could imagine the people in Bendigo as that bus rolls in with the whole Richmond AFL team. That would have been really excited,
They'd be
really
very
excited.
excited.
But even for him personally, just to think of, wow, here I am at 25, 21, a kid, and I've got all these people around me, I think is just wonderful. And it just shows you that human connection, how important it is. And as you rightly said, Graeme, that respect, that's what it's all about, isn't it? So in times of uncertainty, whether it's new policies, economic downturns, or shifting customer behaviors, teams can become risk averse, hesitant to try new things. And I was actually speaking to a CEO yesterday, and he was saying his board of directors are extremely risk averse. And it's just been this uphill battle for more than I think it's been more than 12 years. And I said,
Wow.
geez, you've got tenacity. I think a lot of people would have just let it go. But he kept chipping away, saying, we've got to do these changes and, doing the economic breakdowns. And he just was so chuffed because he was able to share with me yesterday that at last there'd been a little bit of a change in the board makeup, and they went, all right, we'll trust you. And it is paid back tenfold. And now they're all guns blazing. But he's thinking to himself, wish we'd looked at this more than a decade ago. But that's what happens, and it is that risk averse, whether it's a board, whether it's a team, or whether it's an individual. So, what advice do you have for leaders to help their teams embrace change and build resilience instead of just retreating into fear? Mm,
Well, the first thing I would say that for any board or leadership team, the most dangerous thing you can do is just keeping doing what you've always done
mm,
because things are changing so profoundly.
mm,
And one of the things, and humans don't handle uncertainty well. In
no.
fact, there's clinic when I speak with a team, I often ask them about what they've found most stressful over the last 3 months. And in most cases, uncertainty comes out number one.
Mm,
So, so it is something that we do struggle with. And there's actually scientific studies that show that we get more stressed by knowing we could get an electric shock compared to we will definitely get an electric shock.
wow.
So
Gosh.
there's something hardwired into us that doesn't
Mm,
cope to with uncertainty.
mm,
I think we can frame uncertainty differently because it does create a bit of anxiety, a bit of energy. And
mm,
so we can think, well, what's the opportunity in this uncertainty? There's lots of moving parts.
mm,
What are the opportunities that are coming up that could make a difference? And then one of the people I interviewed in the Caring CEO was Professor Amy Edmondson, worldwide expert on
Mm,
psychological safety.
mm.
And she recommends that people lead like a scientist.
Oh,
And, and what she means by that is that there's no way we can be 100% sure of any decision. There's just
mm,
too many moving parts. But as a group, we should form a hypothesis. We think this is the problem and this could be the solution.
mm,
We do it, we all get behind it, we all commit to it, and then we revisit it.
mm,
Was that the correct problem? Was that the correct action? And if it's not on path, we tweak it and change it again. And I
mm.
think it's a really sensible way to just do it bit by bit, and know that we can change our minds. If it's not working out, we can retreat.
Yes.
There's
Mm,
some decisions that are huge, and when you choose one path and you're stuck there for a long time,
mm,
but most of them aren't like that. Most of them are decisions that we can change our mind or adjust, if it's not working as we'd hoped.
mm,
So reframing the uncertainty as opportunity. And the other really interesting thing about stress, and there's some very interesting studies around this, that if we reframe it and think that it's helpful, it's not anxiety, but it's energy to try new things,
mm.
it has less harmful impact on us. So Professor Professor Kelly McGonnell, that's who works, sort of thing. So the uncertainty and the stress can be reframed as opportunity and energy.
Mm. Yes, yeah. It's so true. It's I think people stop, don't they? We look at ourselves, Graham, starting our own businesses. There's a lot of people that have that thought that they would love to start a business, but then that fear of failure. What are people going to think of me? What if this doesn't work? And it can stay in people's minds and totally immobilize and not move on. But we know in business, just like it is being an employee, that things will constantly change. And so if we
Absolutely.
worry about everything, we just stop moving, don't we?
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
absolutely stop moving. And there is nothing wrong in going, you know what? I had a crack at it. I had a go.
Exactly.
All right, maybe it
Exactly.
didn't work out the way that I wanted to, but I had a go. And I think, that's been the philosophy, particularly of my father. I had much
Yeah.
older parents because I got three much older brothers, being born during the Depression and then going to
Yeah.
the Second World War. He always said, you just got to give it a go, Michelle. Just give it a go. And full supporter, like your parents are, and in
Mm.
supporting you through, those depths of despair. But then throughout, your journey of business, it was the same with my parents and thinking that you've just got to give it a go. And let's not worry, well, and it's very easy to say because I know I still do, about what people think about us. I think if we didn't have that thought in our head, oh, gee, I think it'd be well, I know personally it'd be a lot better in life. I don't know. It's always that silly thing. What will people think if this doesn't work? Mm.
I saw this 90-year-old lady being interviewed, and she said, when I was in my 20s, I always worried about what people thought about me.
Mm.
When I was in my 50s, I didn't worry about what they thought of me. And then in my 90s, I know they weren't thinking about me in the first place.
Yeah. But it was even silly things. And I know this is just totally random. It just came to my brain that I remember, my grandmother, because she was very old, and she remembers saying to me, you never leave home with a hole in your underpants because if you had an accident, what are they going to say? And you think yourself as an adult, seriously, if you've been hit by a car, they're going to be thinking more things about your broken bones than they are about a tiny hole in your underpants. But it's the same thing again, like what will people think of me if I'm
Yeah,
not wearing
yeah,
this or I'm not doing that? And oh, yes, I think a lot of it comes from our belief system too, doesn't it, Graham?
definitely.
And then, of course, how that meanders through life. Let's have a chat about WeCare 365. You've co-founded it, and it does help managers have better mental health conversations. Many leaders, especially in hospitality, aren't trained in this area and worry about saying the wrong thing. What are some key principles for having supportive and constructive conversations with employees who may be struggling? Now, I get I have a lot of um, conversations with senior leaders who are working with really young people. The
Yeah,
industry has, a lot of different people working it, but we have a high percentage of young males, Graham,
yeah,
around that 18 to 25. And we know the rates of suicide here in Australia and globally are horrific for that age group. But, time and time, I've heard some beautiful stories where the CEO has stayed back and had that conversation because, the young person comes in, and it's not just young guys. It's everybody in all age groups. But what do we say? How do we handle those conversations? Because I know the biggest thing I hear is, but I'm not an expert. What am I going to say to them? Mm,
yeah. With the WeCare 365, we've got a framework which is ICARE, and the I stands for identify. How do
mm,
we identify someone that could be struggling? And that is usually observing changes,
mm,
changes in behavior, changes in mood, changes in appearance, changes in relationships. And it's just abnormal for that person. And so that usually is a good signal for any person when they're,
mm,
more stressed than they would normally be. The C is for compassion, and that's about how we put ourselves in their shoes. We listen with empathy. We make some observation about the changes that we've seen
mm.
and ask, are you okay?
Yes. Mm,
And let it hang,
mm,
just wait. And if they do come forward, um, keep asking questions because the more they feel understood, the
mm,
greater our capacity to influence them, influence their behavior.
mm,
And if we are in a situation where, they have admitted the issues, the next part is to access experts. So encourage them to seek help.
mm,
And that could be, their employee assistance program through work. It could
mm,
be seeing their GP, seeing a psychologist, but taking that action. And depending on what's causing the stress, if it's a financial issue, maybe seeing an accountant or something like
mm,
that. So accessing experts is really, really good. The next one is R, and that's for revitalizing work. And we often think that if someone's stressed, they should maybe go home and, you know, be by themselves. But often
mm.
that's the worst thing that people do if they're not feeling in great shape.
Yes.
Just stare at the walls and the problems become bigger and bigger.
Mm,
All the recovery research tells us that people are much better being connected with their workmates and teammates than being by themselves.
mm,
And so it may mean, cutting back work hours or cutting back responsibilities, but still having that connection because that work and that connection and making a difference is good for our well-being.
mm,
And then the E is exercise, just to encourage them to exercise. And part of that, as you talked about before, could be going for a walk with them at
mm.
lunchtime, after
Yes.
work, where, you're walking outside in nature, not looking face to face. And often that can be the best place and the best environment for having that discussion.
Mm,
So that eye care framework, I think, is a really good way to think about not just how we identify and have the conversation, but
mm,
thinking about, connecting them with experts, encouraging them to take that experts, and then following up a week ago to see if they've done that, to see if they've taken that action.
mm,
And I can absolutely guarantee if you go in with a spirit of care and a spirit of truly being curious, want to understanding what's going on,
mm.
people will respond accordingly. A monologue won't cut it. A
No,
monologue
no,
won't cut it.
it's so true. And you're right. Look, I know many in my, the community I work with, they had those EAPs, and
Yeah,
once it's all anonymous, so they know where they can reach out. And I've had even senior leaders, talk to the frontline teams and say, "Hey, I've used it."
Yeah.
So it's there. Don't be shy. And you're very right about isolation. I think too often we think the remedy is go home, have a rest, read a book, go on a holiday, go to the day spa, whatever it might be.
Mm,
But you're right, those thoughts just grow like a horrible little monster in our head.
definitely.
It's having that conversation and saying to them, come into work when it suits you, or 2 days a week, or 2 mornings, because we saw, when we did have that downturn a few years ago and all the lights were shut off, so to speak, isolation was the biggest issue, wasn't it? And we
It was.
desperately needed people. You could only Netflix and eat tubs of ice cream so much. Although I really wish now I'd taken more advantage of that. But anyway, that's another story. Graeme, I thank you so much for your generosity of sharing your story with my listeners and myself, but also giving them some really great insights and strategies and tips that they can use not only personally, but with their teams, and to share, further out with the broader community. Is this how can they get in touch with you, Graeme? Because I'm sure there's a number of my listeners thinking to themselves, look, I'd love to have a further conversation with Graeme, and how could we possibly bring him in to our business or present at our conference? And then as well, is there something about your business that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think, as a first point of contact, if anyone feel free to reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. You can ask me questions through there. I can answer that very easily. So that's a really, really good thing to do. In terms of the range of programs I have, they're typically around presentations, workshops, and this e-learning. And I think you'd be well aware of this, that, we forget 75% of what we hear in 6 days unless there's spaced learning that follows. And so the beauty of these WeCare 365 programs is that then allows people to go through a program which really embeds the knowledge, embeds the
Mm,
frameworks, embeds the resources, and feels confident to do that.
mm,
I guess the other element that is very important in this area is this concept of psychosocial risk.
mm,
Now, every board of directors in clubs, restaurants, every management team has a legal obligation to know what the psychosocial risks are and to know what to do about them. Now, one of the biggest problems is that no one understands what psychosocial risks are. So I'll explain what they are.
please.
They are harmful work stress.
Mm,
Psychosocial risk is harmful work stress. But there is now a legal requirement that boards and leaders must not know just the level of the stress there, but also to understand the root causes that contributed to that stress.
mm,
And this will really become more and more prominent. And there have been some notable prosecutions, even in the hospitality sector. That I
mm,
can't remember her name. That poor young girl in Victoria in a cafe that took her own life.
mm,
Led to a significant prosecution and a significant crime.
mm.
And so just know that building that culture of care and encouraging self-care, caring for each other, that's a natural antidote for that psychosocial risk or
Yes.
harmful work stress.
Mm. I will put all your links to LinkedIn and also your website, Graeme, in the show notes so everybody can see them. Otherwise, the website is your name? Yes. Graeme Cowan,
graemecowan.com.au. Yep.
and that is GraemeCowan dot
Thank you.
com dot au. But we'll put all those in the show notes. So thank you once again for sharing your journey, the Are You Okay? And of course, that We Care 365, which is a program that will certainly help leaders and their teams in organizations. Listeners, please reach out to Graeme. He shared some wonderful advice with you today. And I know going forward, you can learn so much more from him. Thank you so much for joining me, Graeme.
Thanks for inviting me on, Michelle, and thanks for the great work you do in the hospitality sector as well.
Thank you.